JSU students, we know how much you love cheering us on game days.
But there's something bigger than winning the big game. Your vote.
Voting is your chance to make a difference just like we do on the field.
So this November, let's make a play for change.
Get registered, stay informed, and show up on game day, November 5th.
Let's make a big time play together. Go vote.
Be our vote.
Basketball fans, it's that time of the year again. The NBA is back. From opening tip-off to buzzer beaters, BetOnline has you covered with the best odds, biggest promotions, and live in-game betting on all your favorite teams. This season, every game matters. BetOnline has every stat, matchup breakdown, and live odds to bet on during the game. And it's not just the NBA. BetOnline has odds on everything from football, the MLB playoffs, NHL, to political props. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here.
What's up, Tiger fans? Welcome to another episode of Tiger Talk TV. I am the Corey C. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single upcoming episode. You can find us on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So be sure to follow the show and tell every Tiger that you know. And remember, when you support Tiger Talk TV, it all helps the cause, which is the I love Jackson State University. All right, and I'm joined today by a special guest. He's here to talk about the UAPB Golden Lions. He reports for the Pine Bluff Commercial. Welcome back to Tiger Talk TV, Tanner Spearman. How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me. How are you?
All right. Always a pleasure to have you. Obviously, a big game for Jackson State. It's homecoming, and we have the Golden Lions coming to town. So we want to hear about this team and what's going on up there at the Bluff. So the Golden Lions, they currently sit at 3-5 overall, 2-1 in the SWAC, beating Prairie View and Valley, and of course losing to Alcorn and Grambling. Now they were picked to finish 5th in the SWAC West, but they're currently tied for 3rd and still in the mix. So how do you feel the season has gone so far compared to the internal expectations going into the season, regardless of where they were picked? Because I recall Coach Alonzo Hampton stating back at the SWAC Media Day that he was pretty optimistic about this season with the new coaching staff, and I think about 50 new players.
Yeah. I mean, it's for me, when in a situation like this where you're trying to build up a program, I always want to see just give me some progress, show me that you've taken a step forward, and they've absolutely done that this year. I mean, they were 0-4 in conference play at this point a year ago, and now here they are 2-2, a couple home wins against Prairie View and Valley. So definitely moving forward in the right direction. As far as the standings go, I think it's partially because, a couple teams have maybe not done as well as they were expected, but UAP is benefiting from that. And I mean, like you said, tied for 3rd right now is, I think if you told a lot of people that going into November, UAP would tie for 3rd in the West, there'd be a lot of people that would have been happy with that. So the rebuild is definitely, going in the right direction so far.
Now, the 50 new players, that's a lot. Even in the transfer portal era, you usually only see that with the first-year head coach, your roster shakeup that large. But so why do you think there was such a big roster overhaul going into year 2 for Coach Hampton as opposed to year 1?
Well, just with the timing of the hire, he really didn't have time to bring in a lot of people last year. I mean, I guess he could have portaled during the spring or whatever, but, they only signed like 4 high school kids that first class. And I think from everything I've heard, he didn't want to be the guy that comes in year 1 and just cleans house. He wanted to give the guys that were there a chance to show what they can do and, earn a spot potentially on the roster. And then the plan was, I think, to bring in a lot of guys this year once he'd gotten a little bit of a, audition from those guys that were already here. So I think they got that last year. And like you said, brought in a ton of players this year. You're seeing a mixed match now of you got some guys like a Makai Hagens or like an Anas Lukman or a Khalil Arnold, guys who were here last year. And then you've got some other new guys that have really stood out, like someone like a Giovanni Gibson or, a Quentin Sterling or whoever you want to name. So it's a mix of the old and new, and it's really worked out so far.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What would you say are some of the biggest differences you've seen in Coach Hampton and his team from year 1 to year 2 after having a full season under his belt?
Yeah, definitely the passing offense for sure. I mean, we can go back to last year, and it was a musical chair of quarterbacks, 3 different guys. mixing and matching, trying to find somebody who's going to work. And, this year it's been Mekhi Higgins the whole way. They named him the starter, the week of the first game, and they've stuck with him. And that wasn't something they were able to do last year. And so having that one consistent guy who's really stepped up his game from what he was last year as well, that's been the biggest difference that I've seen. Because last year offensively it was rough. And now you've got a quarterback that's putting points on the board. You've got a receiver like Javonte Gibson, some other guys too. And Alonzo Hampton will definitely remind you every time you ask about Javonte, like he's good, but there's some other guys too.
Okay.
And, you see the run game even start to get going here recently. So the offense is now keeping up with the opposing offenses and keeping them in these games. The defense is starting to do some things. They're making some plays. Still got some work to do, but definitely the offense has been so much better than last year. No doubt about it.
Talk about some of the coaching staff additions, starting with offensive coordinator Tony Hull, who coached alongside Hampton back at ULM. And he was the co-offensive coordinator at Grambling last season, and they had the number 3 offense in the conference.
Yeah, and, Hampton has said many, many times that when he got the job here, that was the first guy he tried to hire as offensive coordinator. Wasn't able to get him on that occasion, but, the guy who was here last year ended up leaving. So, and they had a coaching change at Grambling. So all of a sudden Tony Hull was available, and he went and got him, and it's been a benefit. And you talked about Grambling, what their offense did last year. You look back the year before when he wasn't there, and that offense was not good at all. And then they bring in Tony Hull, and all of a sudden they're putting up points. They're moving the ball. Miles Crawley had the year he had last year, and I think you give a lot of credit to Tony Hull for that. And so when he came here, I thought maybe he can do something like that for UAPB. It's happened faster than I thought it was going to happen, but I definitely think he's just a guy that's really, really been huge for this team. And the whole offensive staff is mostly new. The defensive staff is a lot of the same coaches, but Tony and the other guys he's brought in have really made a difference, especially in that passing game.
Let's talk about the team. Just kind of give me a quick general overview of the season up until this point. And we'll dive into the specifics throughout the show, but just what are kind of some opening thoughts on the team so far?
Yeah. Last year, and Hampton has said this too, last year, there was a lot of one-sided games, against Jackson State, against Alcorn, against Grambling, you name it. People were kind of taking it to them. And all of a sudden this year, they're playing in these games. They're competitive with these teams. I mean, they led Alcorn 14-0 in the first quarter. They, I can't remember. I don't think they ever led Grambling, but they had it tied a few times. And, again, here at their home games, they've been able to, Prairie View and Valley are teams they lost to last year, and they were able to come out and beat those teams this year. So, that's the thing that stands out to me is just they're winning some of these games that they lost last year, and some of the other games that were pretty one-sided. Now all of a sudden they're much more competitive games. And so I think that's even, they don't like to talk about, moral victories or anything like that. But for us on the outside, it's like, okay, this team took it to you last year and you played with them for 4 quarters this year. That tells me you're moving in the right direction. So it's been a very much a, rebuild in progress year, but you're seeing the results, you're seeing the progress. And, obviously the year started off with a tough one against an SEC team. And then they were, they bounced back with an NAIA school that they trounced, and the Southern Heritage Classic and all those things. Took on a really good Central Arkansas team that took it to them. But since conference play is gone, it's been a lot better from last year, win or lose.
Now, one thing I've noticed about this team is that they've played well at home for the most part, but struggled a bit on the road so far this season. And they'll be at the Vet for homecoming this Saturday, so that's not ideal for them if they're struggling on the road. But has Coach Hampton spoken about the causes of some of those road woes?
I actually asked him about that very thing this week, and I mean, you can try and split hairs on what they've done at home versus what they've done on the road. He just took it back to we're still learning how to win. For me, honestly, look at who they've played. I think that's the biggest difference because, I mean, at home, no disrespect to anybody, but Valley and Prairie View are not Alcorn and Grambling, right? And they're not Arkansas and they're not Tennessee State. I mean, Tennessee State's like tied for second in their conference right now, and Arkansas is an SEC team. So and also Alcorn and Grambling were homecoming games for those teams. And so it's going to be a lot like this week where you've got a huge crowd that's all fired up and in a party mood that's against you in these games. So I know they're tired of being somebody's homecoming, but I think it's been the atmospheres, it's been the level of competition they faced on the road. That to me is what really stands out. But again, they're still in that learning to win mode, and they won 2 games last year, and they were by a combined 2 points. So now this year they're starting to win some games, but they're still learning, how to close things out in the fourth quarter. And they've done it a couple of times, they've fallen short a couple of times, but it's all part of the process.
Yeah. And a big positive that I'm seeing with this team is just the offense overall, just kind of across the board. If you look at the numbers, they're third in the SWAC in both points per game at 28 and total offense at 360. Obviously, there's two big standouts on offense, but let's get into them individually, starting with the quarterback, Makai Higgins. I know you talked about him a little bit, but one of the best in the SWAC. 1,900 plus yards on the season, 15 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions, and talk to the casual fan that's listening right now who may not be familiar with UAPB football and has never heard of Higgins. What do they need to know about him?
Well, even last year he had the ability with his legs. He's a dual threat guy. When the protection breaks down, he can take off and run with it. He can make something happen. They'll give him the ball and design runs. He always had that last year. What he's done this year is show that he can throw the ball too. And I think he may have been a little banged up at times last year, so that might have had an impact. And obviously, when you're rotating in and out, you're in the game, you're not in the game. It's hard to get into a rhythm. But this year, he's really stepped it up as far as passing the ball. He's not panicking as much in terms of taking off and running it with it. He's trying to scramble to buy time to find an open receiver. A few times that he probably needs to just throw it away or take off with it, that he's taken some sacks. But, he's been so much better throwing the ball. You mentioned the 15 touchdowns to 3 picks. Last year, it was 3 touchdowns, 4 picks. So he's taking care of the football. And really the 3 interceptions he's had, I think one of them was a deflected pass at the line. The other one, I think, against Grambling was, like, if I'm remembering correctly, and I've slept since then, but I believe it was into the fourth quarter. You're down by 10 points. You're just desperate to make anything happen. But it's one of those deals where, okay, whatever, it's an interception. There's really only been one bad decision that he's made with football. And so I think that's really the biggest thing. And he's got the arm strength. He can throw the deep ball. We've seen him hit Gibson several times. He can throw it deep. He can throw it short. It's just the passing game and the decision making has been a lot better. Still got work to do, like I said, but he's been so much better than last year, and he's accurate with the football too. So when you put all those things together, and you've got some receivers that can make the plays that they can make, it really is a recipe for success.
Now, he suffered an injury right there at the end of the Valley game last week. Any update on that?
Yeah, I think he's fine. I mean, he was in the post-game press conference, and I even saw when they were doing the alma mater, he was walking around fine. So I think he just, probably some kind of stinger. I mean, Hampton doesn't like to talk about injuries, so there's no telling. He could be hiding something from us, but he looked fine in the press conference afterwards. So I wouldn't be too worried about that, but it's just one of those things.
The injury occurred with just a few seconds left on the clock, and UAPB was up by 2 touchdowns. And I know there was a lot of questions about why was he still in the game at that point. Has Coach Hampton spoken on that? Is there anything you can tell us about that situation?
Yeah, I asked him in the post game, and he just said, they were just he said it wasn't about running up the score. It wasn't about anything. It's homecoming. Some guys wanted to make plays in front of their family. And he talked about trying to instill a killer mindset in his players. And the phrase he used was, "We want to kill an ant with a sledgehammer," which is a pretty good quote there. But so that's how he explained it. He was just trying to get his guys to not give up and play to the end, and which, to be fair, when you're trying to learn how to win in the fourth quarter, I get that to a degree. Probably could have just taken a knee, but he had his way of doing it and wanting to instill a certain mindset in his players, and so that's what they decided to do.
And you mentioned the all-world wide receiver, Giovanni Gibson. He's statistically the best receiver in the SWAC, 44 receptions, 944 yards, and 7 touchdowns in 8 games. So talk to that casual fan again about Mr. Gibson.
Yeah, he's been just a real standout. And I mean, Hampton was high on him all offseason, but I don't know that any of us publicly knew what we were going to get out of him this year. But, I think you talk about the yardage. I mean, he catches some deep balls. His longest catch this year is 60 yards. So, he can go deep and make the plays, but I think he's also versatile enough to where you can throw it to him short and let him do something after the catch too. So I think a lot of times you see those deep ball receivers in college, sometimes that's all they can do. And so they're kind of limited otherwise. He's a guy that's a bit more versatile, and I think that's why he's been as good as he's been. And he can make the contested catches too, which is why even at this point in the season, when other teams know we got to cover this guy, he's still able to make some plays and get some catches and put up some yards. I mean, he had 7 catches for 102 yards last week. And I mean, he's no secret at this point. So for him to still be able to do that, especially in a game where it was raining and for the first half, they barely threw it, and he still ends up with 102 yards. Yeah, that tells you something.
No. Now, up front, the Golden Lions, they haven't looked particularly good at times with that offensive line. They've given up the most sacks in the SWAC with 26. So talk a little bit about those woes. Has that been injury related, or is Coach Hampton still looking for the right mix of guys up front?
I think, I mean, even at media day back in July, he admitted that they didn't get as many new guys at that position as they wanted. So I think that's just part of that, program building thing where they're still trying to get the guys into the program. And we've seen at the skill positions, they've gotten some of those guys they need. Haven't really found those offensive linemen. They brought in a couple guys who are starting on the O-line. As far as I can tell, the O-line, at least at the starting level, has been pretty healthy. Unless somebody's playing through injury that we don't know about. But as far as missing time, every time I look out there, it's the same, 5 guys. So it's not so much injury. They had 2 returning starters. They had to bring in some guys, elevate a guy who was a second stringer last year, and they just haven't been able to produce. Don't have the depth to be able to rotate those guys in and out to, give them some time to breathe and everything. So yeah, that's just part of that. It's year 2 of a rebuild, and they just haven't been able to build that part of the team up yet. And that's the thing about Higgins is the numbers he's put up. They'd be so much better than they already are if he had, more time every play. But he's got the mobility to get out of some sacks on some occasions. But yeah, definitely the offensive line has been a concern.
And then how about run blocking? How has the rushing attack been so far?
Early on, it wasn't. They weren't getting much. The last 3 games, they've been a little bit better. I think they've been over 100 yards each of those last 3 games. But yeah, they had 200 yards last week and 3 touchdowns against Valley. But they had 102 against Grambling, 115 against Prairie View. So they're starting to figure some things out. BJ Curry has been kind of the starter here as of late. He didn't start the year as a starter, but he's been coming along well and making some stuff happen. And I definitely think they're getting better in that regard as far as the run game. Still, again, you got an offensive line that's a work in progress, but they've definitely gotten better, no doubt about it.
And despite the offensive line struggles, UAPB has put up some impressive offensive stats. You just look across the board. They average 18 first downs per game. They're 4th in the SWAC on third down conversions at 37%, 2nd in the SWAC in offensive efficiency. They score 83% of the time when they enter the red zone, and they're one of the least penalized teams in the SWAC. And they're the only team in the SWAC with the worst time of possession than Jackson State at 27 minutes per game. So pretty efficient offensively. But before we move over to the defense, what are some other names on offense that JSU should be concerned about besides the big 2?
Yeah, so as far as receivers go, I mean, obviously Gibson's the big one. Armani Roan has been their second leading receiver. He's got 2 touchdowns. Damon Dawkins is kind of the leading guy that's back from last year. He's been kind of quiet this year, but he does have a couple touchdowns to himself. Christian Gamage is probably the other big one. He was actually with Giovanni Gibson at Arkansas Monticello last year. They were both freshmen, transferred over to UAPB together. He's been pretty good. 223 yards. He's got a touchdown. There's been some other guys that have been in and out due to injury. Kareem Burke was at Florida A&M as a backup. He transferred over. He's done some things. Hampton keeps alluding that there's 1 or 2 guys that have been injured that he's trying to get in there that we haven't maybe seen yet. So we'll see if those guys can come back this week or what's up with that. But yeah, there's some guys all over there. As far as the run game goes, start of the year it was Jonas Davis and OJ Ross, and then they kind of got hurt. And so now it's been BJ Curry and Zamarian Weber. BJ Curry's got 3 touchdowns rushing. Weber, a transfer from ULM, has got 1. So they've been, and obviously Higgins with what he can do on the ground. But so those have been some guys on offense that have stepped up when needed for sure.
So let's move over to the defensive side. What's your take on how they fared so far this season? And let's talk about against SWAC competition, to be fair.
Yeah. They've been one of those, bend don't break kind of defenses. They've, I think, had their moments. I mean, you go back to Valley last week, they get 2 4th down stops in the 4th quarter, forced a missed field goal against Valley as well. Against Prairie View, they gave up 3 points the entire second half of that ball game. And then there have been other times where, Alcorn was able to break through late in the game. Grambling was able to get one. It's just, so it's been hit and miss. I mean, they're like I said, they're bend, but don't break. And the Prairie View game, I give them a lot of credit for that one because they gave up 1 touchdown on their first drive. And that was the only time Prairie View got to the end zone the rest of the game. The only reason that game was even as close as it was is because Prairie View was hitting 50-yard field goals. But so they've had their moments, they've had their struggles. It's like I said, it's all part of that rebuilding process. And the run game has been a struggle for them, but they did well against Prairie View, not so well the last week or 2. But again, it's one of those things where when you're building a program, you're going to have your ups and downs, and you're going to have some times where you're playing well and sometimes where you're not playing well. And they've also been banged up. I mean, the linebacker position, especially, they've been pretty shorthanded. I mean, a guy who was their leading tackler through 4 games hasn't played in SWAC play yet. So it's just been one of those deals where they've barely had anybody at linebacker. And so that's kind of been probably part of the issue, but they're hoping to get some guys back. So we'll see.
And give us some names on defense, some standouts. If we're in that crowd, those names that we're going to expect to hear on the PA system. I know guys, guys like Green, Kelly, Lukeman, things like that.
Yeah, so Jamarlin Green, he's the leading tackler at this point. You got Jaden Kelly as well, a couple of those guys in that sort of linebacker role that have stepped up. Quentin Sterling has been a safety that was a leading tackler last week. There's guys all over the field. I mean, I'll say, Khalil Arnold and Anas Lukeman have been kind of quiet this year, quieter than what I expected. They're the defensive ends, but there's some guys that any day now could break out. There's Sean Wilson's a safety that's been injured, but he came back. He had a club. His hand was so wrapped up it was like a club last week. They've got guys all over the field. Jalen White is kind of down on the list of stats, but he made 2 great fourth down stops against Valley. So it's kind of been, as far as names, it's kind of been any given week somebody new is going to step up, and that's kind of what you need sometimes, especially when you have some injuries like they've had.
You mentioned those defensive ends being quiet this season, and they've struggled up front and have the least amount of sacks in the conference, only 4 sacks in 8 games. How has that lack of pass rush affected the defense, especially the secondary?
Yeah, I mean, when you've got, and I talked about the linebackers, they've had some DBs that have been out too. It's just not as many, but when you're not getting pressure, you're putting that much more importance on that back end to be able to cover. And sometimes they've done it and sometimes they haven't. And that's really been the biggest surprise to me, because Khalil Arnold was the team's leading sack getter last year. He's only got half a sack this year. So I don't know what's led to that. I couldn't explain it if I tried, but it's just been one of those deals where, if you can't get pressure, you're giving the quarterback time. He's going to pick you apart no matter how good your coverage is, because you can't cover somebody for 30 seconds. Right. So that's one thing that they could do to stand to get better at. I don't have the answer. I'm not a defensive coach, but that's definitely been a surprise to me, because I thought with Lukeman, who started off last year so well and they got injured, and with Khalil Arnold doing what he did, I thought they would be a pretty productive pass rush, but it just hasn't played out that way.
Going up against such a high-powered offense like Jackson State, what would you say? Again, you just said you're not a defensive coach, but what would you say if I had to put you on the spot? It would have to click for UAPB in order to come away with the win, or at least stay competitive.
Yeah, I think, Hampton's going to say they got to stop the run, which he says that every week, but it's definitely true at Jackson State and the run game that they've got. I just think that they've got to, when they have won games, it's been, they get the stops in the second half, in the fourth quarter, in their own territory. And I think it's going to have to be a game like that where, someone like Irv Mulligan, he's going to get his, he's going to get his yards. He's going to get a couple touchdowns, whatever it's going to be. I think you just got to, win as much as you can, get a stop in the red zone, hold them to a field goal, get a fourth down stop if you need to, just do enough to keep you in the game and to hang around, give the offense a chance to, be able to keep pace with what Jackson State's able to do. I don't see them shutting this Jackson State offense down, so they just need to do enough to slow them down to where the offense can keep up. And if they can make this a competitive game going into the fourth quarter, then anything can happen.
Tanner, you mentioned Coach Hampton talking about not having several guys, but hoping to get some guys back from injury this week. That's when we were on the offensive side. What about on the defensive side? Any guys who've been out who may return? I know you talked about it. One particular player who had been leading the team in tackles the first couple games of the season. Is he scheduled to come back, or anyone else?
Hampton just does not love to tell us anything about who's coming back. So he'll say some vague things like, "Oh, we're hoping to get a couple guys back," but he never really says who those guys are. So we'll see. Kyle Vogt is the guy I was talking about before. He's a true freshman linebacker from here in state, but I don't know what his deal is. Hampton's really, really tight-lipped about that kind of stuff. So, if they can get any of those guys back, that would be a huge deal. They've also got another true freshman, Jonathan Goins, here from Pine Bluff High School, that has been a contributor for him when he's been healthy. He's been kind of in and out. So if they can get either of those guys back, especially with how few linebackers they've got, that would be huge. I would love to know who's coming back. But they don't really love to tell me. So my pregame ritual is, just counting numbers on the field and seeing who I can see out there. So
Gotcha.
We'll find out when I find out who's coming back.
All right, good stuff. Good stuff. One fun fact I mentioned earlier that Coach Hampton coached at ULM. He was on their staff back in 2021 when they played Jackson State. So there'll be a few familiar faces on the Jackson State sideline, both coaches and even a player or two who played at ULM back when he was there as well. So I know they're looking forward to that. 2 p.m. kickoff Saturday. No rain in the forecast on game day, so we encourage everyone to come out. But if you cannot make it, the game will stream on ESPN Plus. Tanner, will you be making the trip?
I will.
Awesome. All right. Well, we look forward to seeing you there. Safe travels to everyone. And just any final thoughts, final remarks?
It's like I said, it's gonna be the third homecoming game that UAB has been the road team for. I'm gonna try and get there as early as I can because I've seen some homecoming traffic at some of these places, and if you follow me on Twitter, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so first time I'll be able to get out there to Jackson and see the vets. So
Wow. First. Wow.
yeah, so I'm excited to see it and see what that homecoming atmosphere is like for the Tigers. And but yeah, I think for UAPB, this is just one of those games where just try to show us the progress, because again, you can look back at the game last year and see how that went. Do better this year. If you win, that'd be tremendous. But if you can keep it competitive, at least again, you're showing me that signs of progress that is what I've been looking for. But I do think, as far as the fan base goes, they need that marquee win to really get fired up. And well, it could be this week, it might not be this week, but it's going to come at some point, and I think that's going to be huge for this program.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to it. Again, safe travels to everyone, and we'll see you. I'll see you in the box. I'll see you in the press box.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Okay.
Tiger Talk TV is presented by Bet Online.